Morning everyone, Saturday morning at about 7 AM. We switched over our daylight saving last week, so we're all up early, we're all up at dawn's crack, but I just needed a bit of a morning away from the fumes. I've had a pretty intense couple of weeks in the tent there with my respirator on, and coming home at night just totally fumed out. Got to be careful, even though you're wearing respirators, you're still around the chemicals, so I always give myself a couple of days where I'm not working with it, and this morning's it. I'm out paddling down on what we call our string of pearls. These are some of the whitest sands in Australia along this coast here, and I'm out here with friends in absolutely beautiful conditions. Look at this. I mean, we had massive floods here about a month ago, and it's already cleared up. Now the thing about Jervis Bay is that this area only has around 400 square kilometres of catchment, so our water stays clear for months on end. We never really have dirty water here unless there's a big flood event, and then when it clears out, it takes around about 12 days or so. 12 to 20 days, I believe, is the actual cycle of the clean out cycle of Jervis Bay, because it's such a deep bay, 28 metres in average depth. This particular bay, it cleans out very quickly, and we end up with this ultra clear water. We've got a big wind forecast today. Got Janet, Jeff and Dagmar and Amelia, their daughter, out here paddling with us as well, but I just love this spot, and yeah, nice to have a little bit of headspace. So back onto the Mould de Savo. Got to get back on there and do a couple more areas around those window inserts. It's getting a little bit full on. I'm getting to the point where I'm about to put foam down, so pretty excited. But yeah, nice to have this to come out, and it's about 5 minutes from home, so I'm pretty lucky to have this coast. Love it. This is my old stomping ground. I ran all my business out of this waterway, and it's just beautiful. Absolutely torrential here today. Humidity's at 100%, so there's no bulk laminating being done today. What I've decided to do is to do the reinforcement around the window inserts. Now this is going to take a fair bit of time. Yesterday I spent almost all day completing the cockpit floor down to 2 levels, including the ridge that actually intersects with my bridge deck or my cockpit roof. But now I'm going to spend the next day just reinforcing at least 2 layers of 600 double bias around all of my window inserts before I put the foam down around the edges. Now that's really important. I want a very strong rebate for my windows to glass onto, and I'm also starting to think about the inside of the actual salon as well, and what that's going to mean is I'm going to end up with probably a faired painted surface on the window mullions, which are these sections in between the actual windows themselves. Now, so 2 layers of pretty much cutting and fitting them before I spray, and then I'm just going to use my gun, spray it. I've jacked up the catalyst on my machine out there to 2.5%, taking into account the humidity. It's not an issue for small amounts of laminating. It definitely is for large amounts. I would not like to be putting out you know, half a deck of laminate here on a 100% humidity day, so not a good scene. But for smaller stuff, I can generally play with the catalyst a little bit to get the desired effect, and by jacking it up by about 1% or 0.8%, I'm ending up with a faster cure time, and then I'm expecting some good sunny weather here in a couple of hours to really heat this room up. Now this room at the moment, I've kept it draft free for the first 2 layers. That's part of the AMSA and Australian standard, is that it's a draft free environment, so you don't end up with hot spots where wind's passing over it or sun's belting down on it or whatever. Try to keep it all as one temperature, and I think I've achieved that with all the tarps and all the stuff. With the big mesh tarp I've got up the front there, all the overspray tarps I've got. Now once I finish this part here, I'll be able to open those ends up and allow some airflow through, because I've basically consolidated the tie layer. That's a very important thing, and a lot of boats you'll find are actually built in boat yards, especially ones that are repaired in boat yards where they've got the sun beating on them. Lots of problems with delamination, with gel coat not curing. Looks like it's cured, go out on the water. Ultimately, it's still porous because it hasn't quite cured, because it's been done in the baking sun, or alternatively in the shade where there's a lot of humidity around, particularly in boat yards where they tend to be pretty muddy and horrible environments. Alright, that's the first layer of 600 consolidated down. I'm going to do all of that first, and what I'll probably do is do this half on the port side, So remember, this boat's going to flip over, so it's actually the port side, but on the port side, and then I'll come in and do the second half again, and that way I get 2 layers down, and then I'm likely to peel ply it. I think that's probably the best way to go, because that gives me a good smooth surface, no sanding, no nothing, and then I'm really able to laminate carefully down onto those again, because there's another layer of 600 and another layer of 300 to go on there before foam along this companionway here, or this pathway along the top here, and then there's another 2 layers of 600 to go down those window mullions before I even think about putting any foam in. So I'll leave this side for now, and I'll just consolidate this side, and then maybe this afternoon, or if I'm feeling up to it, I'll do this side, because it's going to take me all day to pretty much get these done, but they're going to be awesome when they're done. I'll be very, very relieved. It'll be a bit like the hatches up the front here. I know they're done properly, and they're done carefully, and they'll never ever give me any trouble. Righto, windows, the bottom windows, or the salon windows, are now complete. I've basically popped in that 600 double bias and done a couple of good layers around them. There's still a lot of work to be done around the supports of them, but yeah, I'm a bit hot, sweating like, Jesus, I'm sweating. But yeah, what I have to do now is do those side windows. They're my sort of side port lights, I guess you'd call them. They've got to be reinforced all the way around. I might move on to doing something else and come back and do that another day, maybe one day next week. Good thing about that is you can do that in amongst doing other jobs, and without having to worry too much about whether you're going to impact on something else. I was able to finish that last little bit of laminating I needed to finish up on the starboard bow up the front there. The entire thing is now covered with 2 full layers, and now it's with a unwaxed laminating resin that I've used here. So really the only prep I need to do to continue with the laminating is to give it a light sand to pick up any little burrs, any little raised bits of fluff before I lay down the next layers. Now there's different regions in this boat. I'm just going to show you a diagram now of the laminate schedule that needs to be done for this boat. There's areas where it needs 600 double bias, there's areas where it needs 1040 quad or 1040 quad, or in my case it's going to be 1215 because I don't have any 1040, so it's going to be a little bit stronger, touch heavier, 200 grams per square metre, but there's only about 8 square metres, so we're only talking about a kilo or 2. In the grand scheme of things in this boat, I'm not worried about weight. I actually like the idea of a little bit heavier boat. The idea of a performance cat for me, at our age, ultimately now we're happy just to cruise and enjoy ourselves, and if we do a bit of motor sailing, that's great. It doesn't have to be down to the last kilogram like most people's cats these days, but I think that's the general consensus amongst middle-aged and older people like us. Now, it got me thinking the other day, the last video I went into quite a bit of detail about how I was going to apply the 2 tyre layers to the deck mould onto the gel coat. Now we call that a skin coat, or essentially a tie layer which ties the gel coat to the first couple of layers of laminate. Now typically we would do that in one session, and if the boat were, or the mould were to be vertical or a lot more accessible, you could certainly use a chopper gun. The only issue with the chopper gun is that firstly with an inexperienced crew, which I admittedly had, and quite frankly, the size of the job at hand, a chopper gun would get out of control very, very quickly without a team of specialists that know how to consolidate that down, and of course a very good operator on a chopper gun. And in the hands of an inexperienced operator, not a fantastic result, and certainly not in the case that I'm aiming for here. I have a very defined weight that I'm aiming for with all of these structures, and using a chopper gun, you can easily end up with 2 mils here, 5 mils here, 2 mils here, quite a lot of material going down very, very quickly. And quite frankly, my family wouldn't have been able to keep up with the amount of material I would have been able to deliver with a chopper setup, and also the mess that the thing creates. Certainly, it's much easier for us to apply laminates in a prescribed standard of practice, which is what the engineers originally planned for us, was 2 layers of 300 CSM, and then we move into our woven laminates and obviously our core material. Now, up until now, pretty much we've discussed laminate structures to the nth. I don't think I could discuss it anymore. What layers, 600 double bias, 1200 quad, 300 CSM, blah, 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 blah. Essentially, there's a theory behind laminating, and ultimately it leads to this. Essentially, the classic laminating theory is based on development of an engineering and physical properties of a ply on the fiber angle to the principal loading direction. So in the case of 300 CSM, and I'll show you some 300 CSM right now. I've got a little swatch here that I made up, and a 300 CSM has fibers in all different directions. They're not joined, they're not continuous or in one long strand. They're just a massive fiber all over the place, and essentially bonded with a bonding agent that's then broken down by the styrene in the resin matrix that actually is applied to the actual chop matting. Now, why do we use that? Firstly, it's a very, very thin layer, and it does actually minimize the chance of print through the gel coat. Gel coat's applied very, very thin, between 1 and 1.5 millimeters on the surface of a mold. Now, I did a few checks as I was gel coating the actual deck with a small mill gauge. A couple of checks, a lot of it goes by feel, and it's a common thing to see, particularly in production catamarans that are made in the same method that I'm making. After a few years, a lot of stress cracking around corners, in wells, in deep sections where gel coat's been applied too thickly. Now, as a result, you're going to end up with a lot of movement, because gel coat typically is reasonably flexible, and underneath you've got substrates moving, and ultimately you're going to get stress cracking. It's just part and parcel of a gel coated boat. Now, a good operator on a gel coat gun will check the thickness quite regularly. I'm actually pretty used to applying gel coat, and you know, at the end of the day, if I get a few spider cracks in the deep sections, in wells, steps, any area where it might have accumulated thicker than I would have liked, and I did apply it reasonably thickly around the windows because I was concerned that it wasn't going to actually flow over, then so be it. But the reality is that the 300 CSM, if it's carefully applied and not just sprayed on willy-nilly, will actually assist in reducing air bubbles, and that is why I spent that time around those hatches. Very, very important, because all of those small rebates, 90-degree angles and radiuses would have really attracted voids, bridging, and all those sorts of things that can happen with laminating. Now, as far as laminating goes, and why I brought this up, is because I think we need to understand the difference between laminates and sandwich constructions, and then when we can combine them together, how we end up with rigidity and what sort of benefits a core can give us to a laminate. Typically, a laminate structure is in a plane. It is in an X and a Y plane. So we have a Y plane and an X plane. Essentially, it's a flat surface that is applied to a mold that ultimately is then removed and provides a certain level of strength and rigidity. And by laminating with a specific ply orientation, and we're talking about the different woven fabrics, certainly woven rovings and the stitched fabrics that we're now using, the high-end composites that we now use, we really are starting to see huge benefits and obviously reduction in weight, provided they're applied correctly and obviously to a prescribed standard of practice. So essentially, by applying the ply orientation in the correct plane, we will then essentially derive a uniform laminate, and that is very, very important. We call that isotropic. Now, isotropic is actually when the structure of a material is in the same physical properties in all directions, actually in the X and the Y plane. Now, when we start to think about the forces on a boat, different areas of the boat will obviously attract certainly different laminates, and in this deck it is very, very important to note that it has about 5 different laminate structures or laminate schedules that I'm working to, some of which I'm beefing up, others of which I'm actually leaving as the engineer designed it. In fact, I'm actually always going above what the engineer prescribed, essentially, just to make sure that I'm covering my bases in all directions. So an isotropic substrate, such as what we see here, if you have a look at this diagram that I've drawn here, it actually has the first layer. Let's say, for instance, the blue layer here is 300 CSM, or my tie layer. The second layer, the black layer, could be, say, 600 double bias. The next layer there could certainly be 300 CSM again, 600 double bias, and then 300 CSM. Essentially, what we're trying to do there is match the orientation of the fiber to get the strength in a flat plane. Let's talk about sandwich construction. In the deck structure and in the hull, certainly you saw me using 30 mil, 20 mil, 15 mil in all different directions and in all different places, and for a very good reason. Core, and that can be anything from aluminium honeycomb to PVC foam, to surfboard foam, to balsa wood, and we're starting to see a lot of balsa wood issues starting to show up around the traps, particularly on a lot of the channels at the moment. We're seeing quite a lot of hurricane damaged boats, certainly on Parlay Revival and Barefoot Sail and Dive and all these other channels that are out there dealing with these issues that have come to the fore after age and obviously plenty of use out in the charter field, etc., particularly in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. But essentially, this laminate here has forces in the X and the Y plane. Now, if we start to think about a structure like a boat deck where we're out on the water and I'm stomping around or belting around on the deck, obviously we're going to get springing and compression with me walking on the deck, which then leads to tension underneath that. That's where we start to use the core. So a laminate such as we see here is very good in a flat plane sense, but certainly when we start to apply forces from above or below that particular substrate, obviously we need to somehow increase the strength, and in our case, boats, or in the case of aviation, obviously wings and fuselages of planes and things, using composite structures where there is a core in it will obviously enhance the strength without adding weight or without adding a significant amount of weight. And I'm just going to run you through some details about how significant that can really be and why I use different thicknesses in different areas. But there's certain areas I can go thinner, certain areas I can go thicker core, and obviously there's reasons why I can do that. The use of a core in a composite laminate is pretty common these days, just about in all instances. And I'm going to run you through a couple of examples here. The first example we have here is a laminate. It's a simple laminate of 300 CSM, 600 double bias on each side. So it's a 4-layered laminate. Essentially, our laminate example 2 is exactly the same laminate, but we're going to add a 1 centimetre core. Now that could be PVC foam, balsa wood, aluminium honeycomb, Nomex, anything like that, Kevlar reinforced type core. And essentially by giving it that extra thickness, we're looking at what sort of effect that's going to have on the rigidity of the laminate. And then example 3, we have the same laminate but twice the thickness of core. Now this is quite a marked thickness in the core, and the reason why we do this is to increase the bending strength and the bending stiffness of the laminate. So we
do a comparison here in this final slide that I have here, and essentially it's going to show the 3 cores in side by side. We've got example 1, we have a weight of 1, a bending strength of 1, a bending stiffness of 1, and then we'll call the thickness T. Example 2 has a weight of 1.1, a bending strength of 3.5, a bending stiffness of 7, and then a thickness of 2. And then we get on to our final example, example 3. We've actually only added 0.1 again in weight, but we've actually increased the bending strength by 10 times the original laminate and 37 times the bending stiffness with a thickness of 4. So essentially we have an incredibly stiff structure that is going to then obviously save masses of weight, and working on an I-beam type principle, we're really discovering the benefits of using a core. So the reference for all this material is in a fabulous book called The Fundamentals of Composite Manufacturing, Materials, Methods and Applications, the 2nd edition by A. Brent Strong. I seriously recommend this if you're into this type of theory. This book actually has just about everything in it you'd ever want to know about the composites industry, and I've found it immensely helpful in understanding the processes that I need to go through in my business, and also with the manufacture of this boat. So get into that, guys. It's not sponsored, but certainly worth a read.